Good morning, everybody. And welcome to our presentation on how building partnerships improve response to Hurricane Ian. And I got a little personal thing I want to tell you. Over the weekend, I lost my glasses that I need to see. And the only ones that I have are prescription sunglasses, and I thought that would not be a good idea to come up here with sunglasses. So some of you are kind of vague, but I'll be able to look at my program through it's not the dollar store anymore, you know, it's the dollar quarter store. And my dollar quarter readers this morning, but it is a little bit weird. But I want to thank the Equal Justice Works and Stetson Law for asking us to be here and to be presenters on the panel today. And first of all, we're all just going to introduce ourselves, what our position is at our program, and then we'll start the program. And we, unfortunately, one of our presenters, Mr. Bill Litton, who is is he called the Chief?
Chief of Emergency Management for Osceola County.
Yeah, Chief of Emergency Management for Osceola County couldn't be with us today. So we're going to, all of us are pretty good talkers, so we'll, be able to stretch the time if we need to. But let's get on with the introduction. So I'm Kathy Grunewald. I'm the Disaster Coordinator Attorney at Legal Services of North Florida. I work in our Tallahassee office. We have 5 offices, and our program area is all 16 counties in the Florida Panhandle.
I'm Jeff Harvey. I'm the CEO of Community Legal Services. We have about a 12-county service area that goes from the counties north of Tampa, St. Pete, all the way to the other side of the coast. In addition to that, I'm a drilling National Guardsman, so I have been activated for probably the last 5 storms and have seen kind of the disaster piece firsthand from the state and the local level.
I'm Michelle Trunkett with Florida Rural Legal Services. My office is in Fort Meyers. I'm the managing attorney there, but we do have 5 offices in the central southern part of Florida, coast to coast, and most of our service area was hit by Hurricane Ian, so we experienced a lot there.
Okay, so after listening to the introductions, you got an idea that all of us had a different role at our organizations and a different role during Hurricane Ian, the response and the recovery. And so we're going to talk about those roles, both before and after the hurricane, and how the partnerships that we formed, for me, it's been in the last 4 years, and for others, it may be more recent, and how they impacted the recovery and how we assisted our clients during, and others, partners during Hurricane Ian. So my position at Legal Services of North Florida is to coordinate our response to disasters with non-legal responders, to make connections with other nonprofits, state and local officials, governmental staff, to bridge the knowledge gap between legal and non-legal responders with the outcome of improving our clients' outcome. And I began working there about 4.5 years ago on this grant, and I didn't know anything about disasters, and I didn't know anybody involved in disasters, although I had previously worked on a DSNAP lawsuit related to Hurricane Irma. If y'all remember those big crowds standing out there waiting to get their disaster food stamps. So I worked on that at a previous employer, but that really was the extent of it. And I didn't know at that time all the people that were involved in disaster recovery. So the first thing I did was I was connected by Leslie Powell-Boudreau, who was our executive director, to an organization called Brace in Pensacola. Brace is a nonprofit organization, and their executive director, I don't think she's here yet, but she'll be here tomorrow to talk. So it's a nonprofit organization that's a leader in disaster readiness, response, and recovery throughout Florida, although it's located in Escambia County. So they don't just work in the Panhandle or in that county, but they work in different places, focus on the Panhandle. So this was about 2 months after Hurricane Michael, and so the whole Panhandle was deep in recovery. So through Brace, I got connected with the State Emergency Operations Center and to the Bureau Chief of the Human Services Branch. I asked for a meeting with her just to talk about legal services, and so when I showed up for the meeting, she had invited a whole bunch of other people from the Human Services Branch. But that was good for me because then I had the opportunity to talk about legal services and civil legal aid and all the clients that we represent and the kind of legal issues they encounter after a disaster. And so at that meeting, though, they invited us to come back for a tour of the State Emergency Operations Center. And that's the place where during an activation, you'll see the governor, the chief meteorologist, the head of the Florida Department of Emergency Management go and make speeches and tell you what's happening. So on that tour, we met and connected to the individual assistance officer for the state. So I didn't even know there was such a person at that time. And then they asked us to be a part of Emergency Support Function 6, which is the human services mass care work during disasters. After that, then we started to arrange meetings with the FEMA VALs, the voluntary agency liaisons in the area, found out about all the long-term recovery groups that were forming, and then we began attending those meetings. And I have to tell you, each and every time we went to a meeting, we took the opportunity to give a presentation about legal services, who our clients are, what kind of work we do, and also what were the legal problems that our clients were encountering, and just to tell folks, if it sounds like it might be a legal problem, don't worry about deciding, refer them to legal services in North Florida so we can determine if it's a legal issue or not. That also happened when there were disaster case management contracts that were let out. Then we contacted like UMCOR, United Methodist Disaster Relief, and said, can we give a presentation about disaster legal issues? And one thing I found out is if you offer to give people a presentation, they always accept. And so it's a great way to talk about legal services and the clients, because I know all of us think we do a great job with outreach, and I think we all do. There's still people who don't know what we do or the kind of cases that we handle. Okay. And so then, after that, I got invited to be on daily mass care calls for all the next declared disasters. That was Hurricane Sally at first, I think. And then there were daily mass care calls for the pandemic. Mass care is the provision of necessary services to the disaster survivors. So it's the emergency support function that provides food, water, shelter, medical care, and other functional needs. And so it falls under the Human Services Branch of the Florida Department of Emergency Management. And so leading up to a disaster and for weeks afterwards, there are daily, 7 days a week, morning calls for about an hour with all of those agencies, including Red Cross, Salvation Army, Feeding Florida, Team Rubicon, people that pick up the debris, the Department of Elder Affairs, Children and Families, Agency for Persons with Disabilities, all kinds of people. FEMA is on all the calls, and then Legal Services in North Florida was on the call. And so on these calls, everyone talks about what they're doing, what they need, and what they plan to do. And that's where I had the opportunity to learn about the feeding that was going on, sheltering, staging up supplies, arrangements that are being made for people's pets and animals, and other services that are crucial or essential to survivors immediately post-disaster. And it's on these calls again where they asked me to give a presentation. And every time I would talk about the legal issues that survivors might encounter immediately after a disaster. For example, if you were working on Hurricane Ian, you know probably the first problem that people have are landlord-tenant problems immediately. There are the people trying to do self-help evictions, and with this Hurricane Ian, of course, there were a lot of mobile home issues. And so because of those calls, then I could get calls and refer them to the appropriate legal services program in the area that was handling it then. It's also on these calls that I learned about the opening of disaster recovery centers, the beginning of food assistance or disaster unemployment. It's where you hear about the shelters, which ones are open, which ones are closed, which ones are special needs shelters, and what's happening to the people there. That's where you hear when they're going to start transitioning people out of shelters. All kinds of information about what people are seeing on the ground in the impacted area. And then as a participant in those calls, I'm given limited access to Web EOC, which is FEMA's crisis management system. Web EOC supports emergency management processes and functions by providing a real-time common operating picture that is continuously updated during the incident. So if somebody needs a container to store something, or somebody needs more water, they put those requests, or missions they call them, in Web EOC, and then you can see on there that they are fulfilled or they are in the process of being fulfilled. You also get information there about what DRCs are opening, what DRCs are closing, when they're having a soft opening, who's going to be there. All of that, the food assistance that's going to be available, including DSNAP or other assistance. And so I took all of that information that I had, and because of the partnerships and collaboration and the access to those individuals, it allowed me then to do daily, what I called updates to the people throughout the state on our disaster listserv, and to the project, well, they're not called Project Directors Association anymore. Y'all are called it's a long thing, but it's basically a project.
Florida Civil Legal Aid Association.
Yeah, okay. The Florida Civil Legal Aid Association, which in the way back we called the Project Directors Association. So I could share that information daily with them in the immediate aftermath of the storm. And so they hopefully didn't have to look up when their DSNAP location was going to be open for people to go in and apply in person, or to go in and pick up their EBT card. And hopefully they didn't then have to try to figure out when the Disaster Recovery Center. Because one thing it always seemed that it was last minute. It was sort of, secretive sounds a little negative, but it always seemed a little secretive about when the disaster recovery centers were going to open up and how long they were going to be open and who was the person in charge. But the great thing about it was on Web EOC. So I could go in there daily and check that out. That's where I can still go now and find individual assistance statistics, housing assistance, and a daily report, or now it's every other day report from the state Florida Department of Emergency Management and from FEMA. And as you might expect, immediately after the storm, I started getting calls about landlord-tenant problems and mobile home problems. And so I was able to take that information then that I got, because people in the field knew that landlords weren't supposed to do that, a lot of them, if they had been on the daily mass care calls or to any of the presentations that we had put on in the last year or the state conference that we did last year. They knew that that wasn't right, but they may not have known exactly what to tell the survivors. So I could get that information to Michelle, or at first it was Jorge in your program, and found people that had been on our monthly disaster umbrella group calls to turn it over to. And y'all were working really hard reaching those people and talking to people about it. And all of that information that I was able to get was because of the work that we had spent in the last 4 years, and I know that all of y'all are doing now, to make connections to people. And so if you've started doing that, then you know you have to keep those up. Because I always seem like I'm always calling them, they're not calling me that much. But I call them to remind them that we're still there and this is still the kind of work we're doing. And so those state partnerships and local partnerships are important. And so are the partnerships between legal aid programs. Jeff is going to talk some more about that because one legal aid program can provide support to another legal aid program, whether it's transferring intake calls, helping with phone answering, or in our case, we had just gotten one of our new mobile office units. We have two. One of them is a Winnebago size, and the other one is more like a ambulance size. And so even though we weren't fully knew all of its little ways to operate it, we took it down to Jeff's program for his attorneys to use when they were responding to some tenants who lived in a mobile home park that had been severely impacted by that. So Jeff is going to now talk about his role in the Hurricane Ian in response and recovery and his partnerships.
Yeah, good morning. First, I just want to ask, raise your hand if you're not affiliated with the legal aid program. Okay, so those of you who didn't raise your hand, those are the people you need to get to know during this 2 days. My first experience with disaster work as it relates to legal services was during Hurricane Irma. So I was activated with the Guard, and I spent the most of my time at their Camp Landing, which is kind of in the center of the state. There was a period of time they thought Irma was going to come right down the center and hit Camp Landing, and that's where everything from the Guard side was kind of pre-positioned. Pretty scary, but it ended up working out. And when that got done, I thought, why isn't legal services a part of this? So being in the Guard and having access to things that not everybody has access to sometimes, I got a copy of the emergency manager phone roster, which apparently is not secret. You can Google it right now and find it on the web. And I started making phone calls to emergency managers saying, hey, how can we help? I didn't get a lot of response. And part of that was because they all had their hands full. And so fast forward to the next storm, Hurricane Michael, and I was the task force commander responsible for the Guard relief effort, everything on the east side of the Chattahoochee River, up in the Panhandle. And at that point, I had already had one partner, which was North Florida, and Leslie Powell-Boudreau, who couldn't be here today, but is their executive director. And while I'm walking around with these emergency managers in each county, I'd say, hey, by the way, do you realize there's legal services organizations that are available to help your residents? Is that something you'd be interested in? And they're absolutely 100% yes. And so I started kind of building those connections between the local program and those emergency managers. But the lesson there is, I had the benefit of wearing a green uniform and people kind of didn't ignore me. But when you're not dressed like that, especially at the beginning or right before and then during the immediate aftermath of a storm, it's real difficult to kind of get involved in that group. And it's important to be involved in that group because that's where everything happens. So in Florida at least, the fight, so to speak, if I geek out a little military on you, I apologize. If you have any questions or don't understand a term, please raise your hand. But the fight is really at the local level. Every single county has their own emergency management team, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the different ESFs and where everybody kind of fits in. And having those relationships at that local level is tremendously important. I first met Bill Litton, who wasn't able to be here today, a couple of months after Irma, and we were talking about this idea of partnering and kind of being a part of their emergency management team in some way, shape, or form for future storms. And the first thing he said to me was, man, we would get calls from lawyers all day long asking to volunteer, and I, as a local government, can't do anything with that. And I said, that's exactly where I should be. And then we started talking about where the need might be, because that was one of the challenges we had, is we had a whole bunch of resources that had come from the federal government to kind of help us assist with the need. But in the normal course of legal services work, we just did not find that many cases where people actually needed assistance. And he knew exactly where that need was. And so kind of the takeaway from that again is that emergency manager's responsibility is to really know their county and really know where the issues are in their county. And oddly enough, being in legal services, you would think that nobody understands what it's like to work with people who are in a desperate situation, trying to decide between oftentimes multiple basic needs on a very shortened timeline. But everybody in the emergency management world absolutely understands that. And so that concept right there, I think, we were able to build a strong partnership. So fast forward again now to Hurricane Ian, and I found myself right smack in the middle of the EOCs of Fort Myers and Charlotte County as one of the ground commanders there. And the first thing I started doing was talking to those emergency managers about legal services and said, hey, have you met Michelle? Because if I could get people inside that loop, things like when is the DRC going to stand up, which is something that everybody wants to know, but it is kind of a secret because the policymakers that do those things don't want the public to know until they're ready. They don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. They want to either meet the need or have a good, frankly, a PR event. And that's the other piece, I think, when it comes to disaster work is there is a whole aspect of this that is public relations related. The county wants to be seen as doing a good job. The state wants to be seen as doing a good job. And so there's a thread in that as a service provider can be frustrating. But if you know it's there and you understand it, you can work around it. So what my program was able to do, in part because we were, I would say, the second most impacted area in the state, right behind Florida Rural Legal Services, was able to kind of take advantage of a little less of an impact and try to find a way to strengthen the system better. So on that partnership side, once you've made relationships with the local governments, the counties that actually manage these things, and they know who you are, and they don't look at you funny when you try to get into the EOC, and you know the person at ESF 6 and the long-term recovery aspect of who to talk to, and you're invited to those daily syncs or sometimes multiple times a day. Then I think the next piece is what resources do you have? So during Hurricane Irma, I had what was at the time our headquarters building completely destroyed through water intrusion and all types of things, and it was not usable. But I know from a program perspective, one of our primary missions or goals are in a storm is to keep everybody safe until the storm passes and then get back to work as quickly as possible. And so how do we best do that? Well, if you go back and you look at what the state is already doing from an emergency management standpoint, they have this concept called mutual aid. And so being a guardsman and getting told to kind of fill in for the police officers or fill in for the firefighters for the first couple of days, I've gotten to see firsthand how that works. And we basically assume those missions, many of which the military aren't equipped or ready to, that's not something that we do as part of our training, but we have to just find a way to meet the need. But then when we see the droves of police cars or fire engines rolling in, we know help is on the way because those are the people that are really equipped to do that type of work. And so from that capacity, how come legal services doesn't have a mutual aid concept? And so I was able to work with Legal Services of Greater Miami and Legal Services of North Florida, and we were able to actually exercise that. So as you had mentioned, the mobile unit came down, which was good, again, from a PR perspective. It provided something that literally a picture could be taken and the county could say, hey, look, we have legal services here to help. It provided a focal point for residents to kind of see, where could they get assistance with that type of thing. And then the other thing that we were able to do is we were able to push online intakes down to Legal Services of Greater Miami, who was completely unaffected, and they were able to handle that aspect as well. So for those of you that are LSC-funded programs, the first question that came up is, based on the fact that my LSC allocation is based on my service area and my population, is there an issue with me underwriting the cost of that? And I will tell you that the answer that they provided me is no, that in that type of scenario, using mutual aid support from other programs is absolutely allowed under LSC rules in terms of funding. So ideally, you can apply for additional funding for that, but with what you have, it is something that, at least on a temporary basis, where there's a great need, that they have suggested it's not an issue. So if it hadn't been for these relationships that I've either had with other programs or with the local government, I think that the response in Hurricane Ian would be significantly less. As a result of just the relationship I had with Osceola County, we were able to find a group of seniors that lived in a senior housing. Basically, it was, those scenarios where you have assisted living, you have people that rent, you have people that rent a lot and own the trailer, that had been severely flooded actually after the storm. And so a large group of seniors, probably about in the 200 to 300 range, were displaced about 2 weeks after the storm. And that's one of those things that we would not have heard about in time had it not been for Osceola County giving us a call and saying, hey, this has taken place. Is there anything you all can do there? In that regard, my program went down and got on the ground right there at the hotel where the residents were, and started having conversations about the things that they needed. And a lot of the stuff that they needed was still back at what I'd call kind of phase one response operations. They needed shelter, they needed food. We don't provide those things as a legal services organization, but we had a lot of partners who did. And so we were able to bring in partners like the Osceola Council on Aging and others that could bring those things so that we could get people under control from an immediate needs standpoint, long enough for us to start working through their issue with respect to the legal problems that they had. So with that, I want Shell to tell a little bit about her experience in Hurricane Ian on that.
Thank you. I asked to go last because I think that they have both given a very kind of a broader perspective on working with the counties and working with the state levels, and I was able to tap in on their expertise and really use it at the local level. And they've really given me this opportunity to say how their knowledge really came in and was able to help us do what we had to do after the storm. I mentioned I work at Florida Rural Legal Services. We have 5 offices. We have 13 counties. My specific office in Fort Meyers serves 5 counties. We were Lee County, Charlotte County, Hendry, Glades, and DeSoto counties. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what my office did, but we also have a unit that serves statewide farm workers across Florida. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what they did because they have a much different experience than what I did based on the resources available to them. But after the storm, obviously the first thing we did was make sure we were all okay, safe, and deal with the immediate effects. Most of my team were obviously impacted some way. None of us had electricity, no water. If we had electricity, we almost certainly didn't have internet, or it was very unstable. So we knew right away there was going to be some logistical issues. But for me, at the office level, I was also dealing with a very new team. Almost everyone on my team, with the exception of a few old-timers like me, were either new lawyers or new to legal services. A lot of the people on my team have come from the criminal side. They were public defenders or prosecutors. So they were all within the first few months of working my office and learning civil law in general. So I knew that one of the biggest problems we were going to have is no matter how willing we were to be out there to help, these were going to be legal issues that they weren't they didn't necessarily have the resources to help with. So I needed to figure out how to train them and train them quickly on these legal issues. And quite frankly, myself too. The last time I had dealt with a hurricane really was Hurricane Charlie, which I think was 18 years before, so my memory's not that long. So I immediately contacted Kathy, and I don't know that Kathy would appreciate that I say this, but if your office is hit by a hurricane, immediately make contact with Kathy, because she will give you all the information you need quickly in a way that you can use it. She will answer even the most basic questions. I really can't say thank you enough, Kathy. And she always did it. She was thanking me. It was, I was so appreciative of everything she was doing, but she was thanking me for doing it. And it was just a really nice way to be able to get that information without feeling foolish for asking for it. And she immediately she gave us all the recordings of past disaster conferences. They were audible and video recordings. And, it was just that level of confidence. Immediately I was able to pass that to my team, and now they at least had a basic framework. Yes, there was a big learning curve, but they could at least have that resource to reference if a question came by. They also immediately planned statewide trainings based on some of the issues that we were seeing. So hooking into the people who are already doing this and who already have those resources was incredibly helpful. Jeff already mentioned that I found out he was in Charlotte County, and I said, give me the name of someone. I need to make contacts there. I need to know where to be. Come on over. He introduced me to every single person. He took me to the Emergency Management Center and introduced me all the right people through that. We were able to actually get locations. Our office was destroyed. We didn't have a hub to work from. So through that conversation alone, we were able to get a temporary office in Port Charlotte where we could be there to provide services. Same with going to the DRC. Kathy told me about the DRC. Within days. I mean, I had nothing else to do because I didn't have electricity or water or anything, so I went to the DRC the first day it opened and set up shop there. And because we were there so quickly, we were able to get one of the few private rooms at the library that the DRC was at, and that was a game changer for us. Not only for us to be able to meet with clients, which we desperately needed, and we used that room basically as our office for over a month after the storm, but it was also a meeting hub for us as advocates. Like, that was a place that we could meet, and when we were changing shifts, we were exchanging information, and having that location was really important for us to be able to do what we needed to do. We were holding hearings from the DRC in the library just because Kathy gave us that information. We were able to snag one of those tiny little rooms right off the bat. So so on the legal aid side or legal services side, those partnerships were great, and I can't even express the amounts of calls I got from other attorneys across the state. We needed, one of the biggest problems was mobile home park questions, and I'm sad to say, and we'll never do this again, but we weren't prepared with materials. We weren't anticipating the storm. We didn't have the materials in place to be able to go out immediately and do that outreach. And I contacted other attorneys and, basically just let me copy everything they had on their drives so that we could immediately get out materials. And the community, during the storm, I was getting Facebook messages from lawyers and other legal services. I'm forever grateful, and it was, how can we help you help your clients? I think it's an amazing community, and I saw the best of legal services during that time. At a community level, too, the relationships we made obviously made a difference. Once people found out that we didn't have an office, we were being offered other temporary spaces, which made it obviously made a difference for us. We were able to get invites to mobile home parks, or we went to the shelter. There was a particular question about how landlord-tenant issues were going to be addressed, and we went out and met with one of the Affordable Housing Foundation organizations there and helped address it. So I don't, obviously having local, you guys have talked a lot about that, but I just really wanted to focus on rely on your legal services community, because it's amazing the amount of support we received that helped us do what we had to do at that point. From the farmer perspective, their experience was a little bit different than mine, because I was working into an established system where the DRCs were already set up. So I'm not to say it was easy, but we did have FEMA setting up these locations, and all the other social service agencies were there, and we were able to just fit into that very nicely. From the farm worker perspective, that unit found that there weren't similar collaborations for the farm workers throughout the state. And so that unit really worked with their partners, their interagency partners, and they set up their own, not at DRC obviously, but they set up their own events where they brought all the communities together. The first one was held in Immokalee, Florida, which is on the east end of Collier County, and there was no planned services out there by FEMA or any of the other recovery units. So they set up their own, and they brought in all the community services, they brought in health services, they brought in religious organizations, obviously organizations that work with farm workers, and they created a great event where they were able to distribute supplies, they were able to distribute health screenings, vaccinations, and obviously information that they need. And I think that FEMA actually did end up coming to that event, and so they did get the benefit of a mini DRC at that event, and that was all done because our farm worker unit saw that gap of services for those clients, and it not only served the farm workers, but there's a big Latino community and Haitian community out there that wasn't necessarily tapped into the regular services. So they were amazing because it was easy for me. I talked to Kathy. She gave me the information. They did it from the ground up, and I'm incredibly impressed about how they were able to do that. And they took that and they moved that then later to DeSoto County in Arcadia. They did a very similar thing, and by then a lot of the community partners knew what we had done in Immokalee, and they were just really happy to participate in that event. And then they took it again to, I think it was Wauchula. I hope I'm getting this. Yes, Wauchula. So very small rural counties that didn't necessarily get the attention it might have some of the bigger communities had. So I applaud them for their ingenuity in making it happen for their communities. And Tia Hager is the managing attorney of that unit. So if you ever need to talk to her about that, I'm sure she'd be more than happy to talk to you all about how she was able to reach those communities that were less as part of the regular mainstream loop for disaster response.
Great. Do any of y'all have any questions for us about what we've talked about, or about you want to talk about your experiences? Yes.
Georgia, it has to be in Florida, language access. How do you deal with that through the legal services organizations?
I don't know. I'm not in that unit, so I have to say probably not the best person to answer that. I know that we have a diverse unit that specifically for that purpose. So when we're doing our interviews and hiring, we are looking at the ability for our team to be able to communicate with those resources. So I think we have an attorney in our unit that speaks 4 languages, is from the Immokalee area, that helps build a lot of trust. People are able to know that she's from that community, and so there's that trust issue is immediately there. We have always had people on the farm worker unit. It's a very special unit. It's always had a lot of longevity on the unit, so people who come to that unit stay for 20, 30 years sometimes, and so there's a lot of trust building on that. So they go into those communities and people know them by first name. They know us by their names, their faces. I'll be honest, it's not my place to speak about that question specifically, but I would say from my perspective, looking on the outside in, having people on our team that people trust and developing those communities through those people has been big for their ability to get that insight into those communities.
I haven't dealt with the farm worker side, but have seen the terms of language barriers and other communication barriers. One of the key things would be planning. So, right now is probably the best time to get with those emergency managers and figure out what resources they have, let them know what resources you may need, And if they can provide them, great, but I would also suggest always have a backup plan for that. So, for my program, while we do have a pretty diverse staff, we just don't, they're just not enough. And so we do have to rely on resources like language translation services and things like that, which then require dedicated internet. And so, the one good thing about the state and federal government when they come in is if they need a resource, they have it. The question becomes is there enough bandwidth for you to jump in on that as well? And a lot of times there is. But when there isn't, then, those are things that you wouldn't necessarily think of as a normal legal aid, but how do I have internet when the internet's out, right? And there are resources that you can buy, there are resources that you can have prepositioned to rent, that, again, anyone that's in the non-legal services disaster community here right now can probably hook you up with those resources, because there's an entire market behind trying to sell that stuff to different governments and different emergency services. So, but all of the things like you were just talking about with like a specific dedicated room, the units at the county level have all kinds of plans and stuff laid out, and immediately after the storm, they're inundated with requests. There's never enough resources. And so if you forget something, it's one thing, but if you actually had the ability to plan for it and you wait until a storm hits, it's going to make it a lot more difficult to kind of get that resource or not have that resource dedicated. So, I think their hands are full enough with special requests from government officials higher than them. I can't tell you the number of times that somebody at the state level decided that they wanted to come down and do a press conference, and it had to change the entire situation as to the way that we were planning on setting up either point of distributions or the like. And so as legal services starts to get more involved in this world, we're kind of at the lower end of the totem pole, even though I think the majority of the people that actually do the work recognize that this is probably one of, if not the most important piece to long-term recovery from a community standpoint.
And in terms of language access, we had provided all of the programs. We had just updated all our disaster brochures. And so we unbranded them and made them available to the other programs. And then we got assistance from the Community Justice Project, which said, hey, we'll translate them. And we translated them, all of them, into Spanish. And then any program that wanted them throughout the state, not just the impacted area, we're able to get them and brand them with their own information on them and their own program and how to apply there. And back in the back with the orange shawl? Yeah.
Okay. We'll start here. I saw her earlier. Hi there. So, Miss Kathy, you were talking about when you got referrals and you determined there wasn't a legal issue. What were those next steps? Did you do like an advice and counsel, or what did you do?
When I got my, what did you say?
Whenever you would get referrals and determine there wasn't legal.
For the referrals, I would refer those folks to find out what county they were in and refer them to the legal services program in that county. So for this past hurricane, Michelle got a lot of referrals from me, and so did Jeff's program, but also a lot of the other programs, because there were 27 impacted counties. So when somebody said, hey, I got information about Good Samaritan Village, and I knew that Jeff and his program were already out there. Another trailer park in the Lee County area. And then when I got a referral just last week about an individual, an older woman, 81, who was having a lot of trouble with her recovery, her insurance company, everything, and was taking care of a disabled husband. I referred her to Michelle and asked Michelle if she would have somebody contact the person individually. And that wasn't the first time I got a referral on an individual where I asked the program to contact them, and the worker working with them told them they were going to get a call from legal services. So many people, this storm impacted a lot of seniors and a lot of older people, even than me, and they were it was just really hard. They didn't know. They hadn't been in a storm, and to be able to not have to call on your own when you have no idea what you're doing, to be able to have an individual call you who you know is going to call, it has just made a big difference. So I would refer them to the program that use that. And I would always connect the people up, by copying on the email. Let me introduce you to Michelle Trunkett. She's going to get in touch with you. And Michelle, she did it all the time. It was really great. Because you know what, when you're in that position, all of us, if you make a promise, you really have to keep that promise. And you really, if you get an email about somebody, you really have to be available right then to email them back and say, this is what I'm going to do for you. And then you got to do it. Because, we want them to trust us. We want them to come back. We know, as Jeff said, for many people, the only thing that's keeping them from full recovery is a legal problem. So we just need to find them, or they need to find us.
Thank you. And you also mentioned that you had a mobile unit. So how useful was that? What was its purpose? I've been working with flood survivors in eastern Kentucky, and a lot of people can't get out of their haulers and don't have transportation ability to call. So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
We don't have much experience yet with that, because we just got our mobile units in 2022. We have the one that we took down to Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida and to the Good Samaritan Village. And then we have a Winnebago size unit that we just got. So it remains to be seen how that will happen. But let me tell you what we're doing with it now, because it is huge. And it's all branded. It's a Justice on the Block, we call it, on the Move, which is a very long name for it. And for some reason, somebody already has a bus they call the Justice Bus, and so let's call it, it's our mobile office that we got thanks to a grant from the Legal Services Corporation to serve people, especially the DRCs are not everywhere. And so some people, it's too far away. They don't have, and maybe they had transportation, but they don't have transportation anymore. So it's to go out into the areas where people can't get to a disaster recovery center. And it is nice. Both of them are nice, but the Winnebago one is really nice. We took it on its first long trip a couple of weeks ago to a Volunteer Florida meeting. And if you're not a part of Volunteer Florida, you should be a part of Volunteer Florida, because all the voluntary organizations are a part of that, and emergency management. So when Volunteer Florida has an emergency management convening, which they had in late February, you can go there, you can find out what's happening. The last one was kind of a recap of Hurricane Ian, but we took the bus there because we were supposed to get this bus for the last 4 years. So I said, I've been talking about it. I'm talking all the time at meetings, and I always bring up the bus, but I never had the bus. So finally, we got it, and everybody there got to see it and go on a tour of it. And one of the first questions they ask us is, are you going to have this in other parts of the state? Because it's in the Panhandle. And we said, yes, we'll have mutual aid agreements with the other programs, and we'll be able to take it down there so that they can use it. But it has 2 offices in it. They both have a separate door, so there's privacy. There's a waiting area. There's a sort of a kitchen area. There is a bathroom, and on the outside there's a big TV screen where we'll be able to put weather or information about resources that'll run all the time. It has a little microwave outside that people could heat up food while they're waiting to talk to an attorney, and it has a little refrigerator, so if you have a baby bottle or if you have insulin, you'll be able to keep it cool while you're waiting. We hope we never have to use it, because Florida won't have another disaster in that way. we'll be even better prepared than we were when we went to Central Florida earlier. And so for now, we're taking it around and introducing it to people. We've got a whole library tour. I was at 3 libraries last week. People come out and get on the bus, and then we tell them about legal services and how to apply. And then if there is another disaster, it's in our area, we'll take our buses into that area to meet the clients where they are. If it's in another area, I hope that that program will ask us to come, and we'll take it down there.
We have a
so,
few
yeah.
more questions.
I was just going to follow up on that too. I would talk to the emergency manager for that area and figure out what's their plan to get to those people, because there is, I'm sure, a search and rescue concept in terms of what resources they have, and I would also start with that because it's a great resource, but if it was in certain geographies, it may not be the best resource because it may not be able to get where it needs to go. And so there's that, and then I think the second piece is, now that we have this capacity in Florida, the first thing that comes to my mind is what happens if a storm hits the Panhandle? Because I will tell you firsthand, I had an entire guard battalion, so about 600 people in the Panama City Armory, and that thing was underwater after Hurricane Michael. And so that entire unit, who was ideally in the right place for this thing, was actually in the wrong place and were immediately kind of taken out of the recovery effort. And so I already know the state needs another one, someplace completely separate from that area, so that when then there is a storm, we've got somebody else that can go provide mutual aid to them as well. So
Also, our bus system didn't charge anything for about 6 weeks after the storm. Uber was giving free rides after the storm. So if none of these other resources come into play, check into free transportation for your clients that are in more remote situations. We are able to use those services to get people where they needed to be at times.
All right, so we have one more question back here, and then
I did want to say one little thing to thank. You talked about the training that we did immediately afterwards, and this is where your partnerships also work, because Brittany Gomez, who was here from Texas Rio Legal Aid, her and one of the other attorneys at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid did our FEMA and FEMA appeals training, and she did it with, I think, less than a week. We scheduled her to do this training. And then we had help from Daniel Rowinski, who was also here, and Cindy Huddleston, who did our DSNAP and disaster unemployment training. Also, within a week of saying, hey, we need to do this, because we were also preparing attorneys who were going to be taking calls on the hotline. And so we had to get it done quickly. And so thank y'all. For that, partnerships all over the country are helpful.
And that feeds into my question, actually. So what percentage of your legal cases are you looking at? I know there's sometimes rental issues, legal documents, getting queued up for FEMA appeals, insurance. What does that look like? Because roughly.
Michelle, do you, I can answer just based on past history. Do you want to talk about right now what you're seeing more?
What kind percentage of legal issues that we
or
presented?
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's in phases. I mean, I would say the first 6 weeks, 8 weeks after the storm was almost exclusively landlord-tenant issues. The stories we heard at the DRCs was I've been doing housing work for 20 years. I just never heard or thought that we would hear some of the stories we had. So those were what we saw at first. Now I think we're more into insurance issues. We're seeing, and we're trying to figure out how to respond to that, because none of us are insurance attorneys.
That's where we need, that is absolutely where we need pro bono assistance on insurance cases. So I don't know any of the programs that are experts in that. Like the private bar is. And so that's another partnership you better have for that. And if you saw the Washington Post article yesterday about the insurance, what's going on with insurance payouts in Hurricane Ian, you're going to get a lot of calls.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Ortiz with Pro Bono Net and the ABA Disaster Legal Services Program. Thank you for sharing what you've learned. So I think there's been a push by the federal government on improving data collection. So I'm curious to hear what you mentioned about Web EOC and how you use that data and how it informed your work. If you can talk more about that. And then if you think that there was anything missing from that data that could have helped your work.
Yeah, data's kind of weird with FEMA. And a lot of you in here have that experience. A lot of stuff you think you should really be easily able to find, you cannot find. Then they say, oh, you could find it on Open FEMA. Oh my gosh, you can't find it on, I can't find it on Open FEMA. And I'm like, you know the answer, just give us the answer. Web EOC gave me daily statistics on everything, in terming about the amount of individual assistance that people were getting and the averages, the homeowners assistance, what kind of assistance they were getting. And so that, again, at the beginning, I was getting more information on denial reasons, which is really what we're looking for. Why are people being denied? Is it because they can't prove ownership or occupancy, or is it for some other reason? Then that kind of, the reports wouldn't have it, and on the telephone calls, FEMA was just giving out, oh, we've given out $900 million, and this, that, and the other. But then when you would ask them about the denial reasons, they weren't prepared to answer it at that time. And then I'm still, one of the denial reasons that was a lot bigger than I thought it should be, and I hadn't seen in the past, and if you all have experience with this, talk to me about it. It was no contact for inspection, which I thought, that's weird. I've never seen that many people have no contact for inspection, which means that an inspector called and apparently couldn't get hold of somebody. But I know I had at least 2 calls from people who appointed a third party to be there, because so many people weren't at their homes. They couldn't be at their homes. And the inspector told them that they had to be there and that they couldn't be there. So anyway, a lot of times a problem like that, for that individual, you can easily get straightened out by calling FEMA. But the problem is we don't see everybody and we don't hear about that. So for me, getting that kind of information, I was also very interested in the information regarding ownership. Since FEMA changed the guidelines for occupancy and ownership and kind of brought in the documentation so that some people who might be living in air property may still be able to get the FEMA assistance. They're not going to be able to probably get the CDBG disaster recovery money down the road unless they get that cleared up. And I have had trouble getting that, and then sometimes they put one thing somewhere and then there's a different number somewhere, so it will be, so the best thing to say is it's not that easy to get information that we use, and I think what's most helpful to us is to know the denial reasons. That I would like to know more about that, and that's difficult.
So from the non-legal services side, I'll tell you that Web EOC is what most people in that world know. If it's not in Web EOC, you're not going to get paid. And there's a funding incentivization to use it at the county level. And I think one of the challenges with legal services is I think the historic plan to serve people is at a state level with like the disaster hotline and those types of things, but the rest of the disaster management system in the state of Florida is a local level. It's local actioned and state resourced. And so Web EOC may be a really good tool if we can find a way to incentivize the local programs to put that data in so that it can be seen at a higher level. When you look at and I don't have the recent numbers, but I can think back to like Irma and Michael, when you look at the number of calls and assistance that was at the state disaster hotline level, I would argue that those are a fraction of what individual programs were dealing with at their level. And that information is not being captured because there is no incentivization for programs to either put that information in or report it up. I mean, yes, they ask for it and we all want to play nice, but at some point and I've seen this firsthand, and we need a group of soldiers to go do this. Hey, if it's not in WebEOC, I can't do it. That makes people mad, but in reality, when you go back 6 months later and you're working through FEMA and state reimbursements to that county, it's important that it's in there because it justifies the expenses and it provides the documentation. And so there was one county, Liberty County, who I want to say that their cost share for Hurricane Michael was like 1.5 times their annual budget. And so had they not put stuff in, it would have been even way worse than that. They probably would have had to go file for bankruptcy in order to just survive. But not all counties are resourced the way that they need to be for those types of disasters. So I think it could be a good tool, but you've got to find a way to incentivize the people at the local level to provide the data into it, whether that be daily reports or something, and there's some sort of expense or resource reimbursement, or even just pushing volunteers from the state level down to the local level where the greatest need is.
I think we've used our time up.
Yes, let's hear it for our presenters. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for starting us off this morning. We now have a 15-minute break, so feel free to refresh your drinks. There are water bottles in your bags that you received this morning and water filling stations near all the bathrooms. And we will be back in this room at 11 a.m. for our second session on where policy meets practice in disaster law.